A colossal city floats upon a coral reef in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. This is Nan Madol, an ancient metropolis built from magnetic stone, where legends speak of stones moved by magic. By the end of this exploration, you will understand the full, staggering story of the dynasty that built it and why their island capital was suddenly left to the sea. How did people move 750,000 tons of rock across an island without wheels or beasts of burden? And what powerful force finally caused this engineering marvel to be abandoned for good? What does it say about us that we are still drawn to places where human will seems to defy the very laws of nature? The sheer scale of the Pacific Ocean makes its scattered islands feel like specks of dust on a vast blue floor. Yet on one of these specks, a civilization performed an act of staggering defiance. On the southeastern shore of Pohnpei, a lush volcanic island, they did not simply build on the land. They built a new land. From the air, Nan Madol reveals itself as a precise, almost mathematical grid laid upon the living reef. More than 90 rectangular islets, each one a human-made platform of coral rubble, are arranged with deliberate order, separated by a network of straight, silent canals filled by the rhythmic pulse of the tide. This was not a haphazard collection of huts. This was a planned metropolis, a ceremonial and administrative capital engineered from the sea itself. The foundational choice is the first great puzzle. Why here? Why painstakingly pile countless tons of coral rock onto a shallow, wave-lashed reef instead of building on the stable, fertile ground of the main island just a short canoe ride away? The answer begins with the material that gives Nan Madol its imposing character, the dark, geometric bones of the city, columnar basalt. These are the prism-shaped stones, some weighing many tons, that form the retaining walls and structures on each islet. They were quarried from the other side of Pohnpei, from a site now called Sorcerer. Geologists who have studied the site estimate that the builders moved approximately 750,000 metric tons of this stone across the island, through dense jungle and over rugged terrain to the water's edge, and then somehow transported it along the coast to the construction site. All of this was accomplished without metal tools, without wheels, and without domesticated animals to pull the loads. The engineering challenge is almost incomprehensible. But the instability of the foundation adds another layer of mystery. The entire city rests on coral rubble, a foundation that shifts and settles. The builders used no mortar to hold their mighty basalt logs in place. They relied solely on an advanced technique of stacked cribbing, locking the stones together through weight and clever placement, creating walls that could flex with the movement of their unstable base. This was a city in constant, delicate negotiation with the sea. The very canals that served as its streets were both its lifeblood and a perpetual threat. They provided transportation, drainage, and a bounty of seafood, but they also meant that the city was vulnerable to the ocean's moods, to storm surges and the slow, relentless work of erosion. So we return to that haunting question: what powerful purpose could have justified such a monumental struggle against such a perilous location? The choice seems to whisper that practical convenience was never the primary goal. Something far more significant was being anchored here, something that demanded a separation from the ordinary world, a stage set apart, floating between the land of the living and the deep, unknown realm of the sea. Running your hand along one of these walls, you feel a cool, almost geometric surface, a stone shaped not by human tools but by the ancient, violent physics of a volcanic eruption. These are the basalt logs, nature's own building blocks. When the lava from Pohnpei's volcanoes cooled slowly, it contracted and cracked into these remarkable hexagonal and pentagonal columns, some stretching over 25 feet long and weighing as much as 50 tons. They are perfectly prismatic, as if a giant stonecutter had prepared them. The builders of Nan Madol saw this natural gift and understood its potential. They quarried these colossal stones from the far side of the island, a journey of many miles, and brought them to their watery construction site. Then they performed what seems like architectural magic. Without mortar, without any binding agent, they stacked these giant logs. They did not simply pile them. They used a technique called cribbing, laying the massive prisms in alternating, crisscrossing layers, like a game of gigantic stone pick-up sticks. This interlocking pattern distributed the immense weight down and out, creating walls of astonishing stability that could sway and settle without collapsing on their unstable coral foundation. You can see different types of basalt in the walls: darker, denser stone for critical load-bearing corners, and slightly lighter varieties for fill. This indicates a sophisticated understanding of their materials. But the how of the transportation remains one of the great debates. Some researchers point to practical methods, like floating the stones on bamboo rafts during high tide, or using a system of ropes, rollers, and levers in a coordinated community effort. The local oral history, however, speaks of a different power, the magic of two brothers who could command the stones to fly through the air to their designated places. While we may look for physical explanations, the persistence of the levitation legend itself is telling. It underscores that for the people who came after, the achievement was so monumental it transcended ordinary human capability. The precision of the stone fitting invites comparison to the famous dry stone walls of the Inca, but with a crucial difference: the Inca built into mighty, immovable mountains. The builders of Nan Madol achieved similar stability on a foundation of loose coral, with the Pacific Ocean constantly whispering at the base of their walls. To orchestrate this, to quarry, transport, and position 750,000 tons of stone across such a landscape required more than just skilled engineers. It required a society organized with military-like precision, a population utterly dedicated to a single, overwhelming vision. This level of coordination points directly to a central, unquestioned authority. So who were the rulers powerful enough to command not just the labor of thousands, but the very landscape of the Pacific itself? The story of this impossible city begins not with engineers, but with two brothers who arrived from a distant land. Oral histories passed down for generations tell of twin sorcerer kings, Olasipa and Olasopa. They were said to command the very elements, using magical incantations to levitate the colossal basalt logs into place, building the first sacred altar on the reef. Whether through supernatural power or sheer force of will, these brothers founded the Saudeleur dynasty, a name that translates to Lords of Delure, and they became the first to unify all of Pohnpei under a single, centralized rule. Their reign marked a profound shift from scattered, independent communities to a structured island empire, and Nan Madol was the ultimate symbol of their new order. The city was designed as the absolute center of power, both political and spiritual. Every aspect of its construction reinforced the Saudeleur's authority. The main island's chiefs were required to live within the city's canals, effectively held as honored guests to ensure their loyalty. The dynasty demanded tribute, a portion of all food and resources produced across Pohnpei, which was then redistributed from Nan Madol, making the entire population dependent on the central authority. Anthropologists note this created a highly stratified society. At the top were the Saudeleur and his close family, believed to be semi-divine. Below them were priests and nobles who administered the complex tribute system and conducted the vital ceremonies. And supporting this entire structure were the commoners, the vast majority of the population, who provided the labor and harvested the food that sustained the city. This centralized control was absolute. Historical research suggests the Saudeleurs imposed a uniform system of worship, demanding all ritual activity be directed toward them and their patron spirit. The very layout of Nan Madol made this tangible. The most sacred and restricted islet, called Nan Dowas, was a towering tomb complex surrounded by high walls. Here, it is believed the Saudeleurs and high priests performed elaborate rituals to commune with spiritual forces and legitimize their right to rule. The city was not just a home for the elite, it was a machine for consolidating power, a physical instrument of control where every canal and wall served a purpose in maintaining the dynasty's grip. But such absolute power often seeks to command more than just people. It seeks to harness the unseen forces of the world itself, leading us to wonder what sacred energies or ancient entities the Saudeleurs believed they were channeling from their throne upon the Coral Reef. At the heart of the silent canals lies the spiritual anchor of the entire city, the islet of Nan Dowas. Surrounded by towering walls of basalt logs that rise nearly 25 feet high, this inner sanctuary feels like a fortress for the dead. Stepping through its single, narrow entrance, you enter a solemn courtyard, and at its center stands the main tomb structure itself, a massive rectangular vault built with even more precise and imposing stonework. This was the royal mortuary, the final resting place of the Saudeleur rulers. While the outer city bustled with administrative life, Nan Dowas was a realm of eternal quiet, designed not for the living, but to honor and contain the powerful spirits of the departed kings. For the people of Pohnpei, the world was alive with spiritual forces. Their belief system, a form of animism intertwined with deep ancestor veneration, held that the spirit of a powerful individual did not simply fade away. It remained a potent force that could influence the world of the living, capable of bringing fortune or misfortune. The spirit of a Saudeleur, a ruler who commanded the construction of a city from the sea, would have been considered especially mighty and required careful, continuous reverence. Early European missionaries who later came to the island recorded the profound taboos surrounding this place. Common people were forbidden from even looking directly at the sacred islet as they paddled by in their canoes. Only the highest priests and the new Saudeleur could enter to perform the essential rituals that honored the ancestors and sought their continued blessing for the dynasty and the entire island. Within the central crypt, researchers believe the bodies of the rulers were placed, accompanied by ceremonial offerings. The architecture itself tells a story of layered power and secrecy, with an inner platform that may have been used for orations or rites only for the innermost circle. This focus on venerating ancestors served a crucial political purpose. It legitimized the current ruler's power by directly linking him to an unbroken chain of semi-divine predecessors. Yet some legends speak of practices that extended beyond veneration. Oral histories mention a place called the Eating Cave, a site where it is said certain rituals took place to appease spiritual forces. Anthropological research into similar Pacific Island cultures suggests that in times of great crisis or to reinforce the sacred covenant between the ruler and the gods, ceremonial practices involving loss of life may have occurred. These stories, passed down and softened by time, illustrate the immense pressure the Saudeleurs felt to maintain cosmic order. Their entire claim to authority rested on their unique ability to mediate between the people, the ancestors, and the gods. If the rains failed, if the fish vanished, if illness spread, it could be seen as a sign that this sacred contract was broken. The staggering effort to build and maintain Nan Dowas, then, was about more than honoring the dead. It was the desperate, ongoing engineering of spiritual stability. This relentless focus on the otherworldly demands of the elite raises a pressing human question. What was life like for the thousands whose labor made this divine kingship possible? The canals of Nan Madol were not silent waterways but the pulsing arteries of a living city. Picture the scene at dawn, the water shimmering as dozens of outrigger canoes sliced through the channels, each one laden with the day's tribute from the mainland. Great woven baskets filled with breadfruit, yams, and taro. On the islets, the morning air would have carried the scent of cooking fires and the sound of activity. artisans chipping away at shell to create intricate ornaments and tools, while in the priestly compounds, preparations for the day's rituals were underway. This was a society afloat, a meticulously organized community where every person and every islet had a designated role. The city's layout was a masterclass in functional specialization. Archaeologists have identified distinct districts, islets dedicated entirely to canoe building, where master craftsmen shaped hulls from great logs. Others were reserved for food preparation, with large communal earth ovens for baking breadfruit. The elite priestly class resided in their own walled compounds, separate from the areas where the common laborers and artisans lived and worked. This physical separation reinforced the social hierarchy, making one's status visible in the very stone of the city. Sustaining a population of perhaps 1,000 people on artificial platforms presented profound logistical challenges, solved with ingenious adaptation. Fresh water, the most vital resource, did not come from rivers or springs, but from the sky and the earth below. The builders dug shallow wells into the coral rubble of the islets, which would fill with a delicate lens of fresh rainwater floating atop the denser saltwater that seeped in from below. These wells required constant, careful management to prevent salinization. For food, while the tribute system supplied staples from the mainland, the inhabitants also cultivated small, intensive gardens in soil brought to the islets, growing supplementary crops like turmeric and medicinal plants. The middens, the ancient garbage heaps studied by archaeologists, tell a detailed story of daily life. They contain not just fish bones and shellfish remains, showing a heavy reliance on the rich marine life of the reef, but also artifacts of daily use, fragments of pottery likely used for storage and cooking, and an array of tools made from shell and coral, from simple fishhooks to elaborate ceremonial items. The presence of stone tools and ornaments made from materials not found on Pohnpei suggests a network of trade reaching across the open ocean to distant islands. Yet for all its ingenuity, life for the commoner class was defined by relentless labor and strict social boundaries. While the Saudeleur and his priests conducted ceremonies in the high-walled sanctuaries, the majority of people spent their days fishing from the canals, maintaining the fragile wells and gardens, repairing walls, and processing the constant flow of tribute goods. Their homes, likely simple structures of thatch and wood built upon the stone platforms, stood in stark contrast to the monumental architecture that surrounded them. They lived in the shadow of a power they helped build but could never fully access. One must wonder what was the experience of a young canoe builder, shaping a vessel from a tree he helped transport from the mainland, looking across the canal at the forbidden walls of Nan Dowas. His world was one of tangible skill and physical effort, supporting a ruling class whose authority was derived from an unseen, spiritual realm. This division between the practical and the sacred, the laborer and the ruler, was etched into the very geography of the city. It prompts a deeper question about the foundation of this entire society. What technological mastery or forgotten knowledge allowed this delicate, stratified world to not just exist, but to thrive for centuries upon an unstable reef? The answer may lie not in the grand tombs, but in the quiet, patient understanding of the sea itself. The quarries hold the first clues to this staggering feat of logistics. On the northwestern side of Pohnpei, at a place called Sorcerer, and on a smaller islet named Megaliths, the earth is scarred with the geometric voids where the basalt columns were pried from the bedrock. This is the source, but Nan Madol is the destination, a journey of over 10 miles across some of the island's most punishing terrain. Between these points lies a dense, mountainous jungle, steep ravines, and finally, the shallow, coral-choked lagoon where the city was built. To move a single 50-ton column along this route would be a Herculean task for a modern team with heavy machinery. The builders of Nan Madol moved not one, but thousands of them. The mainstream explanation offered by archaeologists and engineers is a testament to coordinated human effort, often called the Raft theory. The process likely began at the quarry, where workers used fire, water, and stone tools to thermally shock and fracture the basalt along its natural columnar lines. Once a log was freed, the real work began. Researchers suggest they may have used a system of wooden rollers, levers, and rope made from resilient coconut fiber to inch the stone down to the coast. There, during seasonal high tides, they could have lashed the basalt logs between two large outrigger canoes, creating a stable floating platform. The buoyancy of the wood would have borne the immense weight, allowing teams of paddlers to navigate the stone along the coastline and into the lagoon's channels at high tide, finally maneuvering it to its precise location on the reef. This theory is grounded in practical physics and parallels methods thought to have been used for the Moai statues of Easter Island. Engineers who have modeled the forces calculate that moving a 5-ton stone this way would require a coordinated team of perhaps 40 or 50 individuals, a feat of social organization as much as engineering. Yet, there exists another, far more enigmatic explanation woven into the island's oral history. It is the Levitation theory, the legend that the sorcerer kings Olisipa and Olisopa used magical incantations to make the stones fly through the air to their designated places. While modern science dismisses literal levitation, some researchers ponder if the legend preserves a metaphorical truth about a lost technique, perhaps involving harmonic resonance or some form of acoustic engineering that made the stones easier to move, a technology so advanced it appeared as magic to later generations. This enduring puzzle of movement forces us to look past the how and confront the deeper why. What vision was so compelling, what purpose so urgent, that it justified the mobilization of an entire society for generations to move a mountain of stone across an island and build a city where no city should logically be? The answer may lie not in the engineering of stone, but in the engineering of belief itself. The long central canal of Nan Madol runs with unnerving precision, aligned almost perfectly north to south. This is no accident of layout. Certain islets and sightlines are oriented toward the rising and setting points of key stars and the solstice sun, suggesting the city's architects were mapping the heavens onto the reef. This opens a profound debate. Was Nan Madol merely a royal compound, or was it a multi-purpose machine designed to harness both earthly and cosmic power? Scholars now see it as all of these things, a layered center where politics, spirituality, and science were inseparable. Its primary function was undeniably administrative. As the seat of the Saudeleur dynasty, it operated as the ultimate tax collection hub. All tribute from across Pohnpei flowed into its canals, was tallied in storehouse islets, and was redistributed, cementing the ruler's economic control over every breadfruit and yam on the island. Simultaneously, it was a supreme ceremonial center. The rituals performed at Dowas and other sacred islets were not just religious observances, they were political theater, dramatic reenactments of the ruler's divine mandate that every visiting chief was compelled to witness. The location itself provided a strategic advantage. The labyrinth of canals acted as a natural moat, controlling access and making a surprise assault on the elite nearly impossible. Yet beyond these practical roles, more esoteric theories persist. Some researchers have noted the intricate layout of the channels and islets, wondering if it functioned as a massive, sophisticated fish trap, using tidal flows to funnel seafood directly into the city's larders. Others look at the overall design and see a potential cosmological map, a physical model of the Pohnpeian universe with the royal tomb at its center. There are even fascinating studies into the site's unique acoustics. Sound travels with remarkable clarity over water, and a voice raised from a central islet could likely be heard across much of the city, allowing proclamations and chants to ripple through the canals with an otherworldly resonance. This carefully engineered environment served a profound psychological purpose. By isolating the ruling class on these artificial islands, surrounded by water and high walls, the Saudeleurs were set literally and figuratively above the common people. They existed in a realm apart, a space that felt closer to the ancestors and the gods than to the muddy taro fields of the mainland. This isolation, however, would prove to be a double-edged sword. The very walls that projected their invincibility also cut them off from the land that sustained them, creating a fragility that would become catastrophic when the delicate balance of their world began to fail. But a system built on such absolute control carries within it the seeds of its own destruction. For centuries, the Saudeleur dynasty's grip seemed unbreakable, their authority flowing through the canals like the tide itself. Yet legends speak of a growing discontent, a quiet resentment festering on the fertile mainland. The very tribute system that fed the city's grandeur began to strain the people and the land. Researchers examining soil and pollen records note signs that the intensive, centralized agriculture required to supply Nan Madol may have led to gradual environmental strain over generations. The social contract maintained by spiritual awe and sheer power was fraying, and from across the sea a storm was coming. His name was Isoklekel, a warrior hero from the distant island of Quarries. According to the epic oral histories of Pohnpei, he was not merely an invader but a liberator, a figure prophesied to overthrow a regime that had grown cruel and arrogant. The stories describe him arriving with a band of followers, perhaps around the year 1628, though dating relies on genealogical counts. He did not attack the stone city directly. Instead, he is said to have landed on the main island, winning the loyalty of the oppressed local chiefs and gathering a rebel army. The centralized system that had been the Saudeleur's strength now became a fatal weakness. All power, all elite warriors, all decision-making was concentrated in the vulnerable, isolated city on the reef. When Isoklekel's forces finally moved against Nan Madol, they faced not a dispersed enemy but a single, trapped target. The canals that had served as moats now became cages. The epic poems vividly recount the final, chaotic battle within the waterways, with the last Saudeleur ruler, a figure often named Saudeleur, fleeing through the labyrinth he once commanded. One poignant legend tells of him being chased from islet to islet, finally cornered and meeting his end, a symbolic fall that marked the shattering of an era. Archaeological evidence subtly supports this narrative of a relatively swift and violent end. Construction at the site appears to have stopped abruptly. There is no evidence of a slow decline or phased abandonment. Instead, the tools were dropped, the ongoing projects frozen in time. The city did not fall to siege engines or foreign plagues, but to a popular uprising that exploited the very isolation the dynasty had cultivated. With the Saudeleur line broken, the reason for Nan Madol's existence evaporated overnight. The intricate tribute system collapsed. The priests who maintained the sacred rituals lost their purpose. The population, no longer compelled to live on the precarious artificial islands, likely drifted back to the more hospitable mainland. Within a generation or two, the Grand Canals fell silent, the thatch roofs decayed, and the jungle began its slow, green reclaiming of the stone platforms. The political vacuum left by the Saudeleurs did not descend into chaos, however. It gave birth to a new, more resilient system of governance, the non-Mwoki system. This was a decentralized model of competing chiefdoms, a balance of power spread across the island, deliberately designed to prevent any single ruler from ever again accumulating the absolute, centralized authority of the Saudeleurs. In a profound historical irony, the downfall of the Lords of Delure led to a social structure that has endured on Pohnpei for centuries, right up to the modern day. So we are left with the haunting ruins, not as a monument to a conquest, but as a testament to the inherent instability of power that becomes too concentrated, too distant, too reliant on myth over mutual benefit. The stones did not fail, the engineering did not fail. The vision itself, divorced from the welfare of the people it was meant to rule, ultimately proved unsustainable. This leaves us with the silent city as we find it now, a place where the past feels palpably close. What happened when the first explorers from a distant world stumbled upon these vacant canals, and how did their interpretations reshape the legacy of Nan Madol for the modern age? The silence within the canals is not empty, it is watchful. For modern explorers and the people of Pohnpei alike, Nan Madol is far more than an archaeological site. It is a place alive with a spiritual energy they call Ani, a palpable force that commands a deep and abiding respect. Visitors often report an uncanny feeling of being observed from the dense jungle that crowds the stone walls, a prickling on the neck despite the tropical heat. Some speak of hearing faint, rhythmic sounds like distant chanting or drumming when no one else is around, or of cameras malfunctioning without explanation in specific areas. This pervasive atmosphere of unease is rooted in a living tradition. For many Pohnpeians, this is not a ghost city in the metaphorical sense, but a literal one, a place where the spirits of the Saudeleur era, both ancestral and potentially restless, still reside. Because of this, numerous local families observe strict taboos about visiting the ruins, especially after dark. They believe the site is protected by ancestral curses, and that malevolent spirits guard the stones from disrespect. The rules governing behavior at Nan Madol are specific and taken seriously. One of the strongest prohibitions is against removing anything, even a small stone or a piece of coral. The belief holds that taking a fragment from the city invites profound misfortune, illness, or financial ruin upon the thief and their family until the item is returned. There are stories shared in hushed tones of tourists who pocketed a souvenir only to experience a string of bad luck, mailing the stone back to the island with letters of apology. Another common taboo forbids whistling at night within the ruins. In Pohnpeian cosmology, whistling can attract or communicate with spirits, and doing so in such a charged place is seen as a dangerous provocation, a reckless invitation for unseen attention. These taboos are not seen as superstition, but as a practical code of conduct for navigating a spiritually potent landscape. A contemporary Pohnpeian might explain their relationship with the site not with fear, but with a sense of custodial responsibility. They often speak of approaching Nan Madol with a clear heart and respectful intentions, perhaps offering a quiet, internal greeting to the ancestors before entering. It is a place for learning and reflection, but not for frivolity or arrogance. This respectful distance maintained by many locals has, in an unexpected way, acted as a preservation force for centuries, limiting casual plunder and disturbance. Yet this spiritual legacy, which has protected the ruins from human carelessness, cannot shield them from the slow, relentless threats of a changing world. The very elements that the Saudeleurs once defied are now reclaiming their city with patient, undeniable force. The silent guardians of Nan Madol are now under siege from a relentless green army. Mangrove trees, with their tangled networks of roots, are slowly but surely prying apart the ancient basalt masonry, their tendrils slipping between the perfectly fitted stones and forcing them apart over decades. This is the central paradox of the modern era. A place that withstood centuries of abandonment is now threatened by the very nature it was built upon. The preservation of Nan Madol is a race against time, a complex battle against three converging forces. First are the biological threats, primarily the invasive mangrove forests that have taken root in the canals and on the islets themselves. Their roots act as organic wedges, destabilizing the foundational coral rubble and cracking the walls from within. Second are the climatic threats. As sea levels rise and storm patterns intensify, the site faces more frequent and powerful storm surges. These walls, engineered to flex with the tides, are now tested by waves of greater force and volume, which scour their bases and undermine their stability. Third is the constant, patient work of erosion from daily tidal action, which washes away the finer sediments that help lock the stonework in place. UNESCO, which designated Nan Madol a World Heritage Site in 2016, has highlighted these challenges, noting the site is on their list of places in danger. Conservationists working there speak of a delicate balancing act. Any intervention must be meticulously planned to avoid causing more harm than good. The goal is not to rebuild Nan Madol, but to stabilize it, to halt its decay so future generations can experience the same awe and ask the same questions we do today. Specific efforts are underway. Teams conduct careful mangrove removal projects, extracting the trees and their root systems by hand to minimize vibration and damage to the structures. In other areas, experts use non-invasive techniques to reinforce walls, sometimes using traditional materials like coral rubble to fill gaps and provide support, ensuring any new work is distinguishable from the original. A stark example of the urgency can be seen in a section of the outer seawall that collapsed not long ago, a sobering reminder that without intervention, the city could gradually return to the sea from which it came. This leads to a profound, reflective question for all of us. Nan Madol is not just a Pohnpeian treasure, it is a landmark of human ingenuity for the entire world. Its loss would be a loss for our collective history. What responsibility do we share across nations and cultures to protect such irreplaceable heritage? This concern connects directly back to the moment the outside world first laid eyes on the ruins, a discovery that sparked centuries of speculation and forever changed the island's relationship with its own past. The first detailed Western account of the ghost city did not come from a scientist or an admiral, but from a shipwrecked showman. In the 1820s, an Irish-American adventurer named James O'Connell was stranded on Pohnpei after his whaling vessel was lost. He lived among the islanders for years, even receiving traditional tattoos, and when he finally returned to the wider world, he published a sensational memoir. His tales described a magnificent Venice of the Pacific, but they were filtered through a showman's eye, blending half-understood observations with exotic fantasy for a hungry audience back home. O'Connell's account, while often inaccurate, ignited a spark of global curiosity. It marked the beginning of a long and complicated chapter where Nan Madol became a mirror, reflecting not its own truth, but the assumptions and ambitions of every foreigner who arrived in its silent canals. This parade of outside interpretation continued for decades. In the 1850s, a Russian expedition led by Captain E.G. von Kittlitz arrived. Trained in the European tradition, they saw the precise stonework and formidable walls and immediately classified the site as a fortress, a stronghold for a warrior elite. They meticulously mapped the canals, but their military lens prevented them from seeing the spiritual and administrative heart of the place. Not long after, British naval officers from HMS Serpent surveyed the ruins. One officer, captivated by the atmosphere, wrote that it gave the impression of a vast cathedral, a place of worship abandoned by some unknown faith. His romantic description, while poetic, again imposed a familiar European framework, that of a centralized religion, onto a much more complex Polynesian system of ancestor veneration and animistic power. The most transformative and disruptive outside influence, however, came with German colonial administration in the late 19th century. The new governors saw the ruins not as a fortress or a cathedral, but as a quarry. They issued permits for locals to dismantle sections of the walls, using the prized basalt logs to build piers, causeways, and foundations for their own colonial infrastructure. This period of sanctioned plunder caused irreparable damage, physically erasing parts of the city's layout forever. Yet, even the Germans were not immune to the site's mystery. Some administrators, puzzled by the scale, began to speculate wildly in their reports, wondering if Nan Madol was evidence of a lost prehistoric race, perhaps even survivors from the mythical continent of Lemuria. This shift is telling, from practical exploitation to fanciful legend. It shows how the ruins consistently defeated simple explanation. Each of these early accounts, from the traders' tall tales to the naval officers' poetry to the colonialist speculation, shared a common flaw. They interpreted Nan Madol through a purely Western imagination, seeing fortresses where there were sacred spaces, cathedrals where there were tombs, and lost continents where there was a brilliant, indigenous civilization. They collected artifacts and wrote descriptions, but they rarely spoke the language or listened to the oral histories that held the real keys. They were visitors to a library who admired the binding of the books but could not read the words inside. This long history of external fascination and misinterpretation created a dense fog of myth around the stones, a fog that would only begin to clear when a new kind of visitor arrived, one armed not with colonial authority or romantic notions, but with trowels, measuring tapes, and a commitment to systematic inquiry. The scrape of a trowel against coral rubble is a whisper across centuries. In the careful hands of an archaeologist, this simple act can reveal a layer of ancient shell, a fragment of pottery, or the faint outline of a post hole where a wooden house once stood. These are the tangible clues that have slowly pieced together the human story of Nan Madol, moving it from the realm of pure legend into the light of history. The first major scientific expedition to the ruins was led by a German ethnographer named Paul Hambruch in the early 1900s. His work was meticulous for its time, producing detailed maps and recordings of oral histories, but his excavation methods were, by today's standards, destructive. He and his team essentially tunneled into the sacred islet of Dowas, the royal tomb, in search of artifacts and human remains. While he recovered important items, his approach caused significant damage and removed crucial context, treating the site more as a treasure trove than a layered historical document. It would take decades for a more respectful, systematic approach to emerge. In the latter half of the 20th century, American archaeologists like William Ayres and later Pohnpeian scholar Rufino Mauricio began painstaking work. Their strategy was different. They excavated smaller, targeted areas with extreme care, documenting the precise location of every artifact, every fishbone, every charcoal stain from a long cold fire. This methodical work yielded profound insights. The analysis of pottery styles, for instance, allowed researchers to create a chronology. They could trace how ceramic designs evolved over the centuries of Saudeleur rule, providing a relative timeline for the city's construction and occupation. Perhaps the most striking finding was the evidence supporting the legend of a sudden end. In several locations, archaeologists found tools and everyday items simply left in place, as if people walked away from their tasks with no intention of returning. There was no layer of gradual decay, just a sharp transition from occupation to abandonment, a silent echo of Isoclecal's conquest. Excavations of residential islets revealed the stark divide between social classes. The dwellings of commoners showed simple post-hole patterns for thatched houses, with middens full of fishbone and simple tools. In contrast, the compounds of the elite yielded ornaments made from imported shell and stone, and evidence of more varied diets. A key tool in anchoring this story to real calendar years has been radiocarbon dating. By testing charcoal from ancient hearths and organic material trapped in the foundations, scientists have been able to establish a firm timeline. The major construction of Nan Madol, it turns out, began around the year 1200, with the city reaching its peak over the next 4 centuries before its abrupt abandonment around 1628, a date that aligns remarkably well with the oral histories of the Saudeleur's fall. Each specific discovery adds a brushstroke to the portrait. A finely crafted shell adds used for woodworking, a broken loom weight suggesting textile production, a pendant of carved turtle shell that once adorned a noble. These are not just artifacts, they are echoes of individual lives. Yet for all this progress, vast areas of Nan Madol remain completely unexplored, their secrets protected by dense vegetation and the deep sediment of the canals. This leads to an exciting question for the future. What could non-invasive technologies like LiDAR, which uses lasers to map the ground through the forest canopy, reveal? Such a survey might uncover hidden structures, garden plots, or even earlier phases of construction completely invisible to the eye on the ground. The work of archaeology has transformed Nan Madol from a mysterious ruin into a recognized landmark of human achievement. But this recognition raises a new challenge as the site gained international fame. How did it become entangled in a web of modern myths, from ancient astronauts to sunken continents? And why do these fantastical theories persist despite the clear evidence now being unearthed? The inscription of Nan Madol on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2016 was a moment of profound international acknowledgement, yet it came with a sobering caveat. The site was simultaneously placed on the list of World Heritage in Danger, a dual status that captures its entire modern story in a single, powerful phrase. This recognition affirms the site's outstanding universal value, declaring it a treasure for all humanity, while the danger listing is a clear alarm bell, signaling that this treasure is actively at risk of being lost. UNESCO justified the inscription under two key criteria. First, as a masterpiece of human creative genius, citing the colossal scale and technical achievement of building a ceremonial city on a coral reef. Second, as bearing a unique testimony to a cultural tradition which has disappeared, the Saudeleur dynasty. The official description notes the site provides, quote, outstanding evidence of the social and religious practices of the island societies of this period, end quote. This formal recognition transformed the ruins from a regional wonder into a global responsibility. For the people and government of Pohnpei, it brought both vital resources and complex new challenges. The status unlocks access to international preservation funds from the World Heritage Fund and technical expertise from global conservation bodies. It mandates the creation of a detailed management plan to address the specific threats, from mangrove encroachment to rising seas. Yet it also inevitably increases global visibility, potentially drawing more tourists to a fragile ecosystem that lacks extensive infrastructure. The World Heritage Committee outlined specific conditions for eventually removing the In Danger label. These include implementing sustained conservation measures to mitigate the biological and climatic threats, finalizing and enacting the management plan, and strengthening the legal framework to protect the site's buffer zones from any incompatible development. This global spotlight creates a delicate balancing act, leveraging international aid and interest without allowing the site to become a mere tourist commodity, stripped of its spiritual gravity and local meaning. This formal elevation invites a broader perspective, placing Nan Madol on the same world stage as places like Machu Picchu, Petra, and Angkor Wat. What do these sites share beyond their grandeur? Each represents a pinnacle of its culture's ambition, a massive investment of labor and vision by a centralized authority, and each, in its own way, was eventually abandoned, leaving its stone bones to tell a story of power, belief, and ultimately change. They are not failures, but rather enduring questions carved in rock, asking us what societies are capable of when unified by a singular vision, and what vulnerabilities emerge when that vision becomes too rigid or detached from the land that sustains it. Recognizing this pattern leads us to look beyond the stones of Nan Madol to the deeper, more universal human impulses that gave them form. The stones themselves seem to ask for comparison. A basalt log from Nan Madol, with its geometric perfection, would feel strangely at home beside the polygonal blocks of an Inca wall or the massive facing stones of a Giza pyramid. These sites, scattered across continents and oceans, belong to a broad category scholars often term megalithic cultures, societies that independently arrived at a similar, audacious idea to build on a colossal scale using monumental stone. The parallels are not evidence of a lost global civilization, but rather a fascinating testament to a shared human impulse under specific social conditions. When a society becomes highly centralized with a ruler or priestly class capable of commanding vast labor, the drive to create a permanent, awe-inspiring testament to that power appears almost like a law of human history. The methods, however, reveal brilliant adaptation to local challenges. The Inca built their sublime terraces and temples into the immovable Andes, locking stones together so tightly a razor blade cannot slip between them, a perfect marriage of architecture and mountain. The builders of Nan Madol faced the opposite problem, instability. Their genius was in creating similar stability on a foundation of loose coral, using interlocking cribwork to build a city that could sway and settle with the tides. One culture conquered the mountain, the other defied the sea. The organizational parallels are striking. The construction of the Egyptian pyramids, for instance, required the coordination of thousands of workers, a complex system of labor gangs, specialized craftsmen, and overseers that would feel familiar to the project managers of Nan Madol. In both cases, this was not slave labor in the simplistic sense, but likely a form of rotational civic or religious duty, a societal undertaking where participation was tied to social obligation, shared belief, and perhaps even community prestige. The spiritual motivation is another profound common thread. These monumental projects were almost never purely practical. They were physical manifestations of a worldview. The pyramids were vehicles to the afterlife for a god-king. The Moai of Easter Island were ancestral faces watching over the living. Nan Madol was a conduit to the ancestors and a stage for divine kingship. The stone was not just building material, it was a medium for communicating with the cosmos, for fixing the sacred order into the landscape. Yet the differences in purpose sharpen our understanding of each site. Compare Nan Madol to Stonehenge on the Salisbury Plain. Both are ceremonial centers of immense importance, but Stonehenge appears to have been primarily a regional gathering place for seasonal rituals and astronomical observation, a sacred space used by a dispersed community. Nan Madol, in stark contrast, was a full-time, densely populated capital. It was a living city where ceremony was seamlessly woven into the daily machinery of administration, taxation, and political control. The stones of Stonehenge stand in open isolation, a temple under the sky. The stones of Nan Madol form the walls of a lived-in fortress, a temple you could not leave. This brings us back to the specific, haunting character of the city on the reef. Its uniqueness lies in that precarious, defiant location. Other wonders proclaim dominion over land. Nan Madol proclaims dominion over the sea itself, a statement of such staggering confidence that its eventual abandonment feels all the more poignant. What finally tipped the balance from confidence to collapse was not a failure of stone, but a failure in the human ecology that sustained it, a story written not in the grand walls, but in the silent soil and the ancient seeds left behind. The story of the stones is told not in books, but in the rhythm of a voice by the fire. For generations, Pohnpeian elders have passed down the epic of the twin sorcerers, Olisipa and Olisopa, who arrived from a mythical western land called Katau. This oral history, as foundational to the island's identity as the basalt itself, does not begin with engineering but with enchantment. The legend says the brothers came seeking a place to build an altar where they could worship Nonason Sopwa, the god of agriculture. They first tried building on the main island, but their structures collapsed. An oracle then instructed them to look to the reef where the sea met the shore, a liminal space between worlds. There, upon the living coral, their magic finally took hold. To move the impossible stones, they summoned a great dragon. One recorded chant, translated by ethnographers, describes the scene. the dragon flew, carrying the heavy stone, placing it at Madol Pa. The twins, through incantation and spiritual power, are said to have commanded the basalt columns to fly through the air, settling into their perfect interlocking positions. With the altar complete, Olasipa, the elder, grew old and passed from this world. Olasopa then became the first Saudeleur, the Lord of Delor, marrying women from the island's different clans to weave his new authority into the very fabric of Pohnpeian society. This founding myth is far more than a fanciful tale. It is a dense cultural codex. The dragon, for instance, is a powerful symbol not of a literal beast, but likely of a great storm or a rushing river, a natural force of immense power that the brothers harnessed. The sacred eel, another creature featured in the lore, is often seen as a guardian spirit of the canals, representing the vital, life-giving yet potentially dangerous nature of water. The rituals described, from the initial search for a stable site to the ceremonial marriages, encode practical knowledge about the perils of building on unstable soil and the political necessity of alliance. The story also carries deep moral and ecological lessons. The initial failures on the mainland teach respect for the environment, to build where the land permits, not where one simply desires. The narrative emphasizes that true power, the kind that moves mountains, is legitimized through service, in this case to a god of growth and sustenance, and through integration with the people one seeks to lead. So we are faced with a beautiful puzzle. Are these oral histories and the archaeological record two separate paths to the past, or do they walk together, illuminating different facets of the same truth? The legend does not care about the physics of rafting stones, it cares about the meaning of the act. It remembers that the achievement was so extraordinary, it required a supernatural explanation. It preserves the memory of two transformative leaders from across the sea who unified a people and forever changed the landscape. In this light, myth is not the opposite of history. It is history's soul, retaining the awe, the purpose, and the moral framework that bare facts alone can never convey. This intertwining of tangible stone and intangible story inevitably opens a doorway through which many modern seekers have walked, eager to find an even more extraordinary explanation for the city on the reef. The stones of Nan Madol have never whispered their secrets more loudly than to those who wish to hear a different kind of story. In the early 20th century, a British writer named James Churchward published a series of sensational books claiming he had discovered ancient tablets revealing the history of a lost Pacific continent called Mu. In his narrative, this advanced civilization was the motherland of all human culture, and he pointed to Nan Madol as one of its last surviving outposts, a crumbling remnant of a world swallowed by the sea. His ideas, though roundly dismissed by scholars, tapped into a powerful and enduring vein of speculation. The city on the reef, with its precise geometry and impossible location, seemed to many a perfect candidate for a legacy of Atlantis, Lemuria, or some other forgotten super-civilization. This allure is understandable. The standard archaeological explanation, a story of brilliant indigenous engineering and social organization, requires us to grapple with complex human history. The lost continent theory, by contrast, offers a simpler, more romantic answer, a single cataclysm that explains all mystery, placing the origins of such wonders with an older, wiser, and tragically vanished race. It is a narrative that removes agency from the people of Pohnpei and gifts it to a phantom. The remoteness of the island fuels this fire. For a Western audience encountering tales of Nan Madol in the 19th and early 20th centuries, the idea that a Pacific island society could achieve such a feat on its own often seemed less plausible than a connection to a mythical, European-adjacent legend like Atlantis. The stones became a blank screen onto which outsiders projected their own fantasies of ancient astronauts, sunken continents, and esoteric knowledge. This speculative tradition has woven Nan Madol firmly into modern pop culture. The site appears as a mysterious, magical location in popular tabletop role-playing games where adventurers might uncover arcane relics. It features in novels of speculative fiction as a gateway to other worlds or a repository of alien technology. Television documentaries exploring ancient mysteries often include its haunting visage, the narration hinting at unanswered questions and forgotten origins. These depictions, while fictional, keep the site in the public imagination, sparking curiosity that can lead to a deeper appreciation of its real history. From a scientific standpoint, the evidence against these grand theories is decisive. Geologists confirm that there is no sunken continent in the Pacific. The seafloor there is ancient basaltic crust, not drowned granite continents. The radiocarbon dates firmly anchor Nan Madol's construction to a specific period starting around 800 years ago, not a nebulous prehistoric antiquity. The material culture, the tools, the pottery, the fishhooks, all show a clear and continuous evolution from earlier Pohnpeian settlements, not a sudden inheritance from a more advanced people. Yet to simply dismiss the allure of these myths is to miss their meaning. They are a testament in their own way to the profound impact the site has on the human psyche. Nan Madol feels out of time, a place that seems to defy the ordinary narrative of human progress. When faced with something that feels truly inexplicable, the human mind often reaches for a story that matches the scale of the wonder, even if that story is written in the stars or beneath the waves. This dance between grounded archaeology and soaring speculation brings us back to the physical reality of the city, to a mystery not of continents but of chemistry, locked within the very stones that have fueled so much imagination. A compass needle does not lie. Some visitors to Nan Madol have reported a strange phenomenon, holding a simple hiking compass near certain walls only to watch the needle twitch and spin, refusing to find true north. This curious observation has sparked a modern mystery layered upon the ancient one, the idea that the stones themselves hold a hidden charge. The whispers speak of magnetic basalt, of walls that pull at metal, of an intentional energy harnessed by the builders. To understand this, we must look at the stone's very birth. Columnar basalt forms from molten lava cooling and crystallizing. Within that lava are tiny grains of magnetite, an iron oxide mineral that is naturally magnetic. As the lava solidifies, these magnetite grains can, under specific conditions, align themselves with the Earth's magnetic field at that moment, freezing a record of planetary orientation into the rock. This is a well-documented geological process, so it is entirely plausible that some of the basalt logs quarried for Nan Madol contain pockets of magnetite strong enough to locally disrupt a sensitive compass. Geophysicists who study such phenomena note that while possible, the effect would be highly localized and inconsistent. Not every stone would have it, and the strength would depend entirely on the random mineral distribution within that specific lava flow millions of years ago. There is no evidence the builders could detect, let alone selectively quarry, stones based on this subtle magnetic signature. The idea that they arranged the city to harness some kind of magnetic grid is considered by experts to be a fascinating coincidence, not a planned feature. The human tendency, however, is to amplify and connect. Travelers' tales, repeated over decades, can transform a faint compass wobble into a powerful force field. This pattern is seen at other ancient sites around the world, where natural geological oddities become central to modern legends of mystic energy and lost science. It speaks less to the properties of the stone and more to our deep desire for these places to hold active, perceptible power, a magic we can still measure. This tangible, physical mystery, whether verified or imagined, brings us back to the most human question of all. Beyond the kings and the quarries, the rituals and the rebellions, what was the daily, visceral experience of living within these extraordinary walls, of calling a city built on coral home. The silent canals of Nan Madol were not merely decorative waterways, they were the city's beating heart, a sophisticated hydraulic system that turned a precarious location into a livable environment. To sustain a population on an artificial reef, the builders had to become masters of the tide itself. They engineered a network of over a dozen major channels and countless smaller waterways, all dredged through the living coral and meticulously lined with basalt boulders to prevent erosion. This created a precise, navigable grid that connected every significant islet, turning the entire city into a kind of Pacific Venice where travel and transport happened by canoe. But the system's genius lay in its passive design, working in harmony with the natural rhythms of the ocean. Twice a day, the Pacific tide would flood into the canals, bringing in cool, oxygenated water, flushing out waste and delivering a bounty of marine life right to the city's doorstep. As the tide receded, it would drain naturally, cleansing the channels and preventing the stagnation that could breed illness. Environmental archaeologists studying the site have looked for evidence of even more active management, such as sluice gates or fish weirs, structures that could control water flow or trap seafood. While definitive remains of wooden gates have not survived the centuries, the strategic placement of certain walls and the narrowing of some channels strongly suggest the inhabitants could manipulate water levels and currents to their advantage, possibly to create tidal pools that acted as natural live wells for fish. This hydraulic mastery served a dual purpose of utility and subtle defense. The gridded canals allowed for efficient movement of people, goods, and information, with a message or a basket of breadfruit able to travel quickly from one end of the city to the other by water. Simultaneously, the labyrinthine layout, with its uniform straight lines and identical-looking intersections, would have been disorienting to any outsider, acting as a natural deterrent to invasion. A hostile force entering the maze would find themselves channeled into narrow waterways, vulnerable to defenders who knew every turn. This deep understanding of their marine environment reveals a society that did not simply occupy a space, but actively conversed with it, using the sea's own pulse to power their daily lives. Yet, such a concentrated population required a reliable and abundant food supply, raising the question of how they fed 1,000 people on platforms of coral and stone. The challenge of feeding a city on a reef was a daily, intricate puzzle. You cannot grow fields of taro on platforms of coral rubble. The solution was a complex two-part system, a delicate balance between harvesting the bounty of the sea and commanding the fertility of the land. The people of Nan Madol became master oceanographers of their own lagoon, exploiting its resources with astonishing efficiency, while the authority of the Saudeleurs ensured a steady river of agricultural tribute flowed in from the mainland. The middens, those ancient refuse piles studied by archaeologists, are like culinary diaries. They reveal a diet rich in protein from the sea. Fish bones from dozens of species tell of sophisticated fishing techniques, from simple hook and line fishing in the canals to net fishing in the open lagoon, and even deep water trolling for larger pelagic fish like tuna. The shells of countless clams, crabs, and sea urchins show they forage the reef flats at low tide. Turtle bone fragments and the remains of seabirds like boobies and frigate birds suggest occasional harvesting, likely governed by strict taboos to prevent overexploitation. Yet this marine diet was stapled with carbohydrates. Carbonized remains and pollen analysis show that breadfruit, yams, taro, and coconuts were central to the diet. These did not grow in quantity on the artificial islets. They arrived by canoe as tribute. This was the social contract in edible form. Commoners across Pohnpei worked their family plots, and a portion of every harvest was owed to the central authority at Nan Madol. In return, the Saudeleur and his priests performed the ceremonies believed to ensure good harvests, fair weather, and abundant fish, legitimizing their rule through a cycle of reciprocal obligation. The tools found at the site bring this system to life. exquisitely crafted fishhooks made from pearl shell and turtle bone, some small enough for delicate reef fish, others large and sturdy for hauling in bigger prey. Stone sinkers for nets and likely traps woven from mangrove vines speak to a deep, generational knowledge of marine behavior. Imagine the scene during a communal feast, perhaps celebrating a successful harvest or a sacred ceremony. Canoes would arrive laden with steaming bundles of breadfruit, baked for hours in earth ovens. Great wooden bowls would be filled with mashed taro, while platters held grilled fish, still fragrant from the fire, and shellfish steamed in their own shells. The smell of coconut would be everywhere, used in cooking and as a refreshing drink. This bounty, drawn from both sea and land, sustained not just bodies but the entire political structure. It was a system that worked brilliantly, so long as the belief in the contract held and the environment remained predictable. This reliance on a managed flow of resources from a wider area forces us to look beyond the immediate lagoon, to ask what other connections, what trade routes or alliances might have stretched across the horizon, linking this island capital to a wider world. A sleek voyaging canoe, its sail woven from pandanus leaves, glides into the main canal of Nan Madol. Its hull is not laden with the familiar breadfruit of Pohnpei, but with rare treasures from across the sea, perhaps bundles of obsidian glass from far-off Lu Island, or belts of precious shell beads painstakingly crafted on Yap. This scene, while imagined, is grounded in tangible evidence. The discovery of exotic materials within the city's walls forces us to reconsider a fundamental question. Was Nan Madol an isolated island fortress, or a connected hub in a vast Pacific exchange network? The archaeological record provides a compelling answer. Excavations have unearthed small but significant artifacts made from materials not found anywhere on Pohnpei. Most telling are flakes of obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for making razor-sharp cutting tools, chemical fingerprinting, a technique that analyzes the unique elemental signature of the stone, has traced some of this obsidian to sources over 2,500 kilometers away, in the Admiralty Islands near Papua New Guinea. Other pieces match sources in the Bismarck Archipelago. This means someone, either Pohnpeian voyagers or traders from other islands, was making incredibly long and dangerous open ocean journeys, navigating by stars, waves, and birds to bring this valuable commodity to the Saudeleur's capital. The presence of such goods suggests Nan Madol was not a closed system. It was almost certainly a node in what scholars call the Micronesian exchange, a web of long-distance connections that moved not just goods, but also ideas, rituals, and people across the vast seascape. Linguistic studies support this. The languages of Pohnpei, Kosrae, the Marshalls, and parts of the Caroline Islands all belong to the same Micronesian family, indicating a shared ancestry and sustained contact over millennia. Cultural parallels in canoe design, navigation techniques, and social structures further paint a picture of a connected world, not an isolated one. This evidence shifts our understanding of the Saudeleur's ambition. Controlling the internal tribute of Pohnpei was one thing, but controlling or influencing external trade routes would have been a lever of power on an entirely different scale. Access to exotic materials like obsidian, turtle shell, and certain types of ceremonial shell valuables would have been a potent status symbol. By monopolizing the distribution of these rare items among the local nobility, the Saudeleurs could reinforce social hierarchies, rewarding loyalty with objects that literally came from a world beyond the horizon. This introduces a fascinating symbolic dimension to their rule. Their city, built from the very bones of their island, was also a receptacle for the wealth of the ocean, a place where local power and far-reaching influence physically converged. The debate among experts is less about whether contact occurred and more about its scale and direction. Some archaeologists see Pohnpei as a relative periphery, receiving influences and goods from more established centers to the west. Others point to the sheer scale and uniqueness of Nan Madol as evidence that Pohnpei itself became an influential cultural and political center, a place that others might have sought out. There are even intriguing, though less substantiated, hints of possible contact with Polynesian groups far to the east, suggested by subtle similarities in some oral traditions and the use of certain fishhook designs. What seems clear is that the builders of Nan Madol were not ignorant of the wider world. They were actively engaged with it, using the sea not as a barrier but as a highway. This realization transforms the city from a solitary monument into a listening post, its canals open to the tides that carried canoes from distant shores. It prompts us to wonder if the ultimate ambition of the Saudeleurs was to create a capital that commanded not just an island, but a slice of the Pacific itself. Yet, for all this potential external influence, the city's final days were shaped by a threat that arrived not from across the sea, but from within the social fabric they had woven so tightly. The walls of Nan Madol are not merely stacked, they are composed. Look closely at any surviving section, and you will see a deliberate visual rhythm. The builders did not simply lay the basalt logs at random. They often position the prismatic ends, the hexagonal or pentagonal faces, to create alternating patterns of light and shadow, of solid geometric shapes against the rough coral fill. This was not an aesthetic accident. In a culture where every aspect of life was imbued with meaning, the very fabric of the city was a language, a silent text written in stone to reinforce the ideology of the Saudeleur dynasty. This is symbolic architecture where form and function are inseparable from belief. The most prevalent pattern is the crisscross cribbing itself, the alternating layers that lock the walls together. Beyond its brilliant engineering, this interlocking design could have symbolized the unity of the clans under one rule, or the unbreakable strength of the dynasty, each stone relying on the next to uphold the whole structure. Anthropologists studying Pohnpeian culture note that weaving and binding are powerful metaphors for social cohesion and sacred power. The stone walls, in their essence, are a giant permanent weaving. The orientation of structures adds another layer of meaning. The royal tomb complex, Dowas, is precisely aligned, its entrance facing the open lagoon, a symbolic gateway between the world of the living and the ancestral realm of the deep sea. The choice of stone source itself may have been spiritually charged. The basalt from the Soke's quarries on the far side of the island was not just durable. It was from a specific, potent place in the landscape, perhaps associated with volcanic deities or creation myths. Transporting it across the island was not just a logistical feat, it was a ritual act of bringing sacred power to the center. We see similar principles at work in other ancient cultures. The Egyptians used specific types of limestone and granite from quarries associated with certain gods for different parts of their temples. The Maya oriented their pyramids to capture the sun on specific days, turning astronomy into architecture. For the builders of Nan Madol, the selection, movement, and placement of each basalt log was likely part of a ceremonial process, a continuous act of world building that made the city not just a place of power, but a manifestation of cosmic order. This decoding of silent symbols brings us inevitably to the most imposing and charged structure in the entire complex, the place where all these threads of meaning converged into a single, formidable statement. The central tomb complex of Dowas rises from the water like a fortress of silence. To approach it by canoe, as every visitor and subject once did, is to experience a deliberate choreography of awe. The high walls, constructed from the largest basalt logs found anywhere at Nan Madol, loom over the narrow canal, their geometric faces creating a sheer, shadowed barrier that feels both monumental and forbidding. This was not a place you entered casually. It was a destination you were permitted to approach, a physical manifestation of the Saudeleur's ultimate authority. set apart even within the already isolated city. Dowas was the spiritual apex of the entire complex, the axis around which the cosmology of power revolved. Its design served a single, overwhelming purpose: to house and honor the semi-divine rulers in death, thereby anchoring their enduring influence over the world of the living. Let us walk through its spaces as an archaeologist might, tracing the steps of a ritual that ended centuries ago. The journey begins at the water's edge, where a single, massive portal breaches the outer wall. This entrance is not a grand, welcoming arch, but a narrow, constricted passageway barely wide enough for two people to walk abreast. To pass through it is to leave the realm of the living city and enter a sacred precinct. The act of squeezing through this portal forces a physical and psychological transition, a shedding of the outside world. Once inside, you stand in a broad, open courtyard, an empty space surrounded on all sides by those towering walls of dark basalt. The silence here is profound, muting even the sound of the waves just beyond the stone. The floor is paved with smaller, flat stones, and the scale is humbling. You are in a container for ceremony, an arena designed for an audience of ancestors and gods. Directly ahead, occupying the center of the islet, is the inner tomb structure itself. This is a second, raised platform, again surrounded by its own high wall, creating a chamber within a chamber, a secret within a sanctuary. Access to this innermost vault was likely restricted to the highest priests and the succeeding Saudeleur alone. The construction here represents the pinnacle of Nan Madol's engineering. The basalt logs are colossal, some weighing well over 50 tons, and they are fitted with a precision that seems to defy their immense weight and the unstable foundation. The corners are particularly masterful, with multi-ton prisms interlocked in complex patterns to create perfectly stable right angles. Archaeologists examining the site note that the stone selection for Dowas appears deliberate, with a preference for darker, denser basalt that would have presented a more imposing, somber appearance. Expert analysis of similar Pacific Island cultures suggests the rituals performed here were elaborate and deeply codified. When a Saudeleur passed from this world, his body would have been prepared with great care. Following a period of mourning and ceremony, he would have been brought to this inner chamber for entombment. The act was not merely burial, it was a transfer of sacred essence. The ruler's physical remains were placed within the stone vault, often accompanied by prized personal ornaments and ceremonial offerings, items of shell, stone, and perhaps rare voyaged goods. This was not an end but a transformation. The spirit of the Saudeleur was believed to join the powerful collective of ancestors, becoming an active force that could intercede with the gods for the benefit of the island. Therefore, the tomb was not sealed and forgotten. It became a site of ongoing veneration. Priests would return regularly to perform rituals, make offerings of food and precious goods, and communicate with the ancestral spirit, seeking guidance and blessing for the new ruler and the community. This continuous cycle of ritual turned Dowas into a battery of spiritual power, a place where the legitimacy of the current dynasty was constantly recharged through connection to the past. The staggering effort invested in this one islet, from quarrying its mega stones to its precise, layered construction, sends an unambiguous message. The entire labor of the city, the tribute system, the social order, ultimately served this sacred purpose, maintaining a bridge between the human and the divine. This profound focus on the ruler's final resting place makes the spiritual presence many feel there today not a mystery, but an echo. The walls were built to contain and amplify a specific, potent energy, the weight of memory and the quiet watchfulness of those who were believed to guard the fate of an island. That intentionality, etched into every geometric stone, may be what the modern visitor senses as a palpable, silent attention, a legacy of belief so strong it outlasted the dynasty itself by centuries. The stones of Nan Madol do not belong to the past alone. they are held in the careful hands of the present. To understand their full meaning, we must listen to the voices of those who have inherited their legacy. A respected Pohnpeian community elder might explain it this way: the ruins are not a place we fear, but a place we know. We maintain a respectful distance not from terror, but from a deep cultural understanding passed down through generations. For the people of Pohnpei today, Nan Madol exists in three interconnected realms. It is a profound source of cultural pride, a vital historical lesson written in stone, and a spiritual realm governed by ancient custom and protocol. This nuanced relationship reframes the entire site, transforming it from a distant archaeological puzzle into a living chapter of an ongoing story. The knowledge of what happened there, of the Saudeleurs and the hero Isoclecal, is not stored in libraries first, but in the rhythm of oral histories shared by elders, in the chants that recall the flight of the dragon, and in the traditional protocols that guide how one should approach such a potent place. As one Pohnpeian cultural practitioner has shared, preserving Nan Madol is about more than stopping the mangroves. It is about preserving the memory, the stories, and the respect that give the stones their true weight. If we lose the stories, the stones become just a pile of rocks. The physical site and the intangible heritage are two halves of a single precious vessel. This perspective directly shapes modern interactions with the ruins. In recent years, community-led tourism initiatives have emerged, guided by the principle of Mwahu, which means to do things the right way with respect and propriety. These are not standard tours but cultural exchanges. Visitors are often welcomed by local guides who share not just dates and dimensions, but the living narratives and the proper ways to behave, to ask permission silently before entering, to speak softly, to remove nothing. The goal is to offer a window into the site's significance that honors both the visitor's curiosity and the community's deep-seated values. This respectful contemporary view reframes our entire exploration. It tells us that the ultimate mystery of Nan Madol may not be how the stones were moved, but how their meaning has been carried forward, carefully and continuously, across centuries of change. The greatest engineering marvel here is not the cribbed walls, but the resilient bridge of memory that connects a modern people to their monumental past. We stand now at the crossroads where solid fact meets enduring legend, looking out over the silent labyrinth of islets. After this journey through the canals, we can anchor a few truths in the stone. We know the who, the Saudeleur dynasty, a line of rulers who unified Pohnpei. We know the when, with construction beginning around the year 1200 and the city falling silent around 1628. We know the what, a purpose-built ceremonial and administrative capital, a machine of political and spiritual control engineered upon a coral reef. These are the pillars established through archaeology, radiocarbon dating, and the careful study of oral history. Yet between these pillars stretch vast, shadowed spaces, the great unresolved mysteries that keep Nan Madol alive in our imagination. The how of the stone transport remains the most tantalizing puzzle. The raft theory, using coordinated human labor, tides, and outrigger canoes, stands as the most plausible, grounded in physics and parallels from across the Pacific. It is a testament to social organization, yet the Levitation legend persists, not as a literal truth, but as a cultural metaphor for an achievement so extraordinary it defied ordinary understanding. The question lingers: could there have been a lost technique, a clever application of leverage or acoustics that made the impossible seem effortless? We may never know the precise choreography of ropes and chants that moved a mountain, but the scale of the accomplishment is undeniable. The why of the specific location is another profound unknown. Was it purely for defense and control, or did the reef hold a deeper, spiritual significance as a liminal space between worlds? The evidence of possible astronomical alignments in the city's layout suggests the builders were mapping the cosmos onto the water. but the full extent and purpose of this celestial design remain just out of reach, obscured by time and vegetation. And then there is the final, abrupt end. The evidence points to a rapid abandonment, a society interrupted. The popular uprising led by Isoclecal provides a compelling narrative supported by oral epic. But was the trigger purely political, or were there silent, compounding pressures, perhaps environmental strain from centuries of intensive tribute agriculture, or a shift in the very climate that made the precarious city untenable? The stones do not record the final, desperate council or the last priest's final chant, so we are left to weigh the evidence ourselves. Does the scientific explanation, brilliant in its own right, feel complete? Or does the haunting atmosphere of the place suggest there are layers to this story that carbon dating cannot capture? Perhaps the most honest answer lies in holding both realities at once. Nan Madol is a monument to identifiable human genius in engineering and social organization. It is also a monument to the intangible power of belief, the kind of belief that can motivate a society to spend generations building a city where logic says one should not be built. This synthesis brings us to the final, overarching question, one that looks beyond the basalt and the coral to the heart of the human spirit itself. What is it within us that drives the perpetual, often perilous, pursuit of the impossible? The enduring legacy of Nan Madol is measured not in centuries, but in the questions it compels each new generation to ask. This city on the reef endures not merely as a collection of ruins, but as a profound testament to human ambition, ingenuity, and the unbreakable bond between a culture and its environment. We have journeyed from the mythical arrival of the Sorcerer kings to the urgent conservation efforts of today, tracing the rise and fall of a society that dared to build its heart upon the living coral. Remember the staggering scale of the achievement, a metropolis assembled log by colossal log, a feat of social coordination that moved a mountain of stone to defy a volatile foundation. It was the political and spiritual engine of an island empire, a place where the will of rulers and the faith of a people were made permanently, physically manifest. A Pohnpeian proverb offers a guiding wisdom for such places. It speaks of respecting the stones of the ancestors, for they hold the stories of both the land and the sea. This is the true essence of Nan Madol. It is a vessel of memory. As the Pacific tides continue their eternal rhythm, lapping at the dark basalt walls, the city remains a powerful, silent sentinel. It reminds us that our history is not always written on parchment, but sometimes woven into the landscape itself, in canals and quarries and towering tombs. It is a reminder that the greatest mysteries are not puzzles to be solved and set aside, but conversations to be continued, whispers from the past that still have much to teach us about power, belief, and resilience. We would love to hear which mystery of Nan Madol captures your imagination most. Was it the legend of the flying stones, the sudden silence of the canals, or the spiritual presence many still feel today? Share your thoughts below, and if you enjoyed this journey into the world's historical enigmas, consider subscribing for more explorations where the past is always present.